Hello, I am Gepwin and welcome to this tutorial for Factory Town on how to move your items. Given that Factory Town is a logistics style game about setting up supply routes to various buildings, moving items around is 90% of what you're going to be doing in this game, and it's important to get a handle on, but there's some aspects of it that can be a little unintuitive or confusing, so that is what this tutorial is here to help. We're going to start out by looking at workers and wagons, which behave very, very similarly, and I'm going to go into a few of the differences, but 90% of the time everything that applies to workers will apply to wagons unless I state otherwise. Next we're going to move into chutes, then we're going to move into belts, and then finally we're going to move into rails and minecarts, which is going to cover every way to move items from one place to another in this game. There are a couple of quick notes I need to get out of the way before we start. 1. I am recording in mid-March 2019. The further away you get from this video, the less accurate it could be, because this is an early access game. I am recording this particular video in version 0.089. So if you are in a much later version and something doesn't line up, that may be why. Early access games are hard to make tutorials for that very reason. But I try to keep updated minor notes in the description and comments of the videos if something was mistaken or if something changed. So check down there if something doesn't seem to line up correctly. Also in the description you should see a catalog of all of the topics covered in this video with timestamps, so you can just click on those and go to whatever part of the video you're looking for if you don't need a full tutorial on items and you just have a particular question about a particular type of item movement. That being said, let us move into the tutorial proper. When you start the game, you are going to have a setup very similar to this one, where you're going to have a base. You're just going to be first level because I'm in creative mode. You are also going to have 4 workers standing around the base. This is your starter workers. Now, the first thing that you are obviously going to want to do is have your workers start to gather resources. So to gather resources, you click on a worker with your normal left click button and you go over to a tree. Now this can be set in the options menu as to whether you have left or right click. Right click should be set by default. As you see in the corner here, we have left click for command, right click for issue command, and forward delete for remove, and period for help, which will pop up a little help menu that tells you about workers. That's not completely filled in yet, which is why the purpose of this tutorial. So if you just click on the ground, that will move the worker to a location. If you click on a resource, you now see this little arc. This arc tells you what resource the worker is going to be interacting with. So in this case, it's this tree. I could also move it over to this stone. You also see that second white line on the ground. That is the path that the worker is going to take from the tree to your base. Now, if you just right click on this tree, the worker is going to automatically collect resources from it and going to path to the nearest storage location, which in this case is your main base. But let us say that you have a barn or other viable storage item or a place that they can put resources like a lumber mill, which uses up the wood to make planks. That's something we'll get into in a second. So right now the worker is going from the tree to the base, but if we put a barn somewhere closer, since we right clicked on the tree with the worker is now automatically pathing to the closest storage location. So if you build a closer storage location, the worker is going to take the items from the tree to the barn now until the barn is full, which is going to be 200 items later, so that's going to take a while. But let's say you don't want this. Let's say that you have a stand of trees here, and you have a barn, or you have a lumber mill, or you have a barn close here, and you want to put a lumber mill in somewhere over here so that you can take lumber over to your base. You can take the planks over to your base. But your worker won't path to the lumber mill because it's farther away from the barn. Do you need to delete the barn? No. What you need to do is select your worker, right click on the tree and drag to the lumber mill. You see you can drag from the tree and it has this little arrow. He will carry the wood to wherever you tell the worker to go. Now if you just drop the worker here, the worker will take the wood and just carry it out into the middle of nowhere like that. But that's not very useful. But if you go from the tree and you drag to the lumber mill, now the worker is going to take resources from the tree to the lumber mill instead of just to the barn. If you just right click, again, this worker is going to just automatically carry resources from the tree to the nearest available storage location or a building that can take wood, because this input counts as a storage location. So click and drag for precise orders. Just right click for them to automatically path to the nearest building. Why would you want to do that, you may ask? It's a very viable question. Well, let's look at a couple of scenarios. Let's say that you want to split up an inventory between a couple of places. Right here, I have this barn with tin wood in it, and I have this silo that is almost full and this silo that is empty. So what I could do is tell this worker to take the wood over to this silo, or I could tell the worker to take the wood over to this silo. But if I wanted to fill up both, I would have to first take the worker, order them to go to this silo, then wait for this silo to be full, then issue new orders for the worker to go to that silo. But instead, I can take the worker and I can just right-click on the wood. If you right-click on the building, it's not going to do anything when you see a menu like this appear. Right-clicking on the building or clicking and dragging from the building is not going to accomplish anything. But if you right-click on the wood, this worker is going to now automatically take 2 wood from this building and take it over to this silo, because workers do seem to favor turning to their right when they are assigning closest building. They seem to favor going to their right, even though these 2 buildings are the same distance away from the barn. He went to this one first. But now you notice that this building is full, so the worker transitioned over to taking wood to this silo. The other thing that you can do is you may have noticed another command in there. This barn has both wood and stone. Now, an interesting thing with barns is you can filter them. If you hit this filter button at the bottom, it gives you an item filter menu. So you can set the filter to whatever thing you want to be able to go into that particular barn. So this barn can accept wood and no other items. No other item can be put into this barn, only wood. So if we select our worker and we click on this here, deliver everything from this barn to nearest. Deliver wood from this barn to nearest, or deliver stone from this barn to nearest. If you right click on deliver everything from this barn to nearest, now you can't really click and drag this one because it's to nearest. But if we click on the worker again and we say deliver to nearest, they're going to take this wood and go over to this barn because they tend to favor the right, but also this is the first item on the storage kind of queue. They're going to carry all 10 of these out of this barn to this barn, and then they're going to switch over to stone. There we are. He's now switched over to stone without having to issue new orders. If you had just clicked and dragged or clicked on just one of these options, you would have only been able to carry the stone over, and when it ran out of stone, the worker would have waited for this barn to get filled with more stone. Another option that you may be noticing here, when you select a worker who is carrying something, this other option appears. This is just drop off what you're carrying at that location. Drop off what you're carrying at that location. This barn's filtered, so it shouldn't let you. Yes, this barn's filtered, so it doesn't let you, but then it moves on to the next nearest. If you tell them to drop off the item they're holding at a location that is full, they will try, then they will go to the next nearest storage that can take that item. So that's what that other command does. Let's look at the other things that workers can do. Workers are affected by footpaths. So these workers are moving back and forth in these trees. If I give them a footpath, which you assign on the ground by clicking and dragging, and it will create a little path menu like this here. If you get them a footpath, you see, they've basically doubled their movement speed by going on the footpath. This makes workers much, much more efficient. Now, the other thing to note about workers, when you are looking at a building like this, you can grab the wood out of it. Well, this one wants you to supply lumber, but you can actually grab the wood out of these buildings with various items, not workers. I apologize. But you can click on this building to say supply wood. If you just click on this building, the worker will supply wood from the nearest source of wood, or they will deliver wood. Now, you can either click on this, deliver everything from this lumber mill to nearest, but the only thing that's in it right now is wood. This is if your lumber mill is also making paper. So you can have multi-recipe objects, and you can say deliver everything to the nearest, and it will take all of the outputs and take them to the nearest the same way it did for that barn. But if you take this and click and drag back to the base, they will start grabbing off of here and going to the base. If you just told this worker to deliver to nearest, they would probably path to this barn because the barn is very, very close. There we go. Now, one thing I'm not completely sure of, let's check right now. If I give them a... if I give them a path that should make that faster, they're still delivering to the barn. I don't know if they take path time into account. So I've set up these barns. This one is 4 closer and on the right. This one is at 5. But if we give the person a path to go to this barn, and we put it down a worker, are they still going to path to the closest, or are they going to take the travel time from the road into account? No, they are going to path to the nearest barn. Let's do a quick other test here. Let's get rid of this barn. So now these are the same distance away. Still pathing to the barn on the left side here. Now let's delete this barn and see if it's a build order thing, just to do another quick test. So again, 4 apart. Still pathing to this barn on the left. I think when they leave, they like to turn to the right. It is a weird thing, but they seem to always path to the left if given the option. Now let's talk about wagons. As we said, wagons do basically the same thing. If you take this wagon and you tell it to go to this barn, it's going to path the same way. So you can deliver to nearest, you can deliver all to nearest, or you can click and drag to deliver. The main thing with wagons is they can carry 4 items at a time. So this wagon is carrying 4 planks instead of the worker who can only carry 1 plank. The wagon can carry any 4 items, but only 1 item at a time. You cannot have it carry 2 wood and 2 planks. It can either carry 4 wood or 4 planks. The other difference with a wagon is wagons cannot gather resources. Wagons can only carry from a storage building to another storage building. It cannot gather items from a tree. Now, let's talk about chutes. Placing chutes, belts, rails, and everything else that we're going to talk about that is not a worker is very easy. You grab the chute, rail, whatever. I'm going to use chutes because they are in fact all the same. And you left click to place it. Now if you hit R, you can see that it goes around in a little curve, and you can place it on curves like this with R. You can also remove it by having that selected, or any path tool in fact, and right-clicking will remove. Right-clicking and dragging will also remove. It will only remove the first thing that you started with. I'm going to cover this in a second. So if I have a path and I delete those chutes, it will not also delete this path because I started deleting the chutes, and holding it down it will only delete other chutes. So if I go up here, it'll still delete a chute. The path I can delete with the path tool. Now the other thing that you just saw me do is the click and drag, which is new, and it's very, very nice and powerful. You can click and you can drag along the ground, and it will show you a little path, which is where your item is going to go, and then you let go and it builds it. It's really simple and really easy. The other great thing about this is it's going to automatically build stuff if you have terrain. Now I don't have terrain right here, so let's build a little bit of terrain over here. Now you see, normally you'd have trouble building kind of your chutes on this because you're having trouble getting them to line up. You'd have to build some other things underneath, which are these scaffolds. You could build some scaffolds and kind of flatten this out, and that would better let you put chutes on things, and we're going to be doing that later on. You can place chutes on scaffolds. You can delete scaffolds the same way. The other way that you can delete stuff is you can hit X, which activates this remove block layer that's also down here, remove block, and you can, while you have X selected, you can delete everything here. Same rules apply if you start deleting a chute and you hold down, it won't delete paths. If you start deleting a path or whatever, it won't delete. That's the other way to delete. The other thing that you can do with the click and drag is you click and you drag, and it's going to automatically build support for you. Now this is nonsensical. It's not going to work for reasons we're going to go into later with chutes and gravity, but it will automatically build the infrastructure for you. So if you're working with something we're going to cover in a minute, which is the belts, which can go up and down hills at will, and we just clicked and dragged, you see, we've just gone over this hill in one click and drag instead of having to go in and build a lot of scaffolding blocks and other things in order to get it to line up on this rough terrain. And then, of course, we hit X or hit this remove blocks button and click and drag, and it will remove first all of whatever we clicked and dragged on. You can remove the scaffolding, and if you click and drag, it will remove the scaffolding that's underneath your existing stuff and it will just flatten out, so be careful about that when you're removing things. And then you can remove these belts. It's very simple. It will not remove scaffolding if it will completely remove the item that the scaffolding is sitting on, but if it has a ramp scaffolding block underneath and it would just make it go flat, it will go flat. But it won't remove the scaffolding if it would also remove the block on top of it. Let's talk about how workers interact with chutes. So if we put down a chute that goes towards the base, chutes can carry certain items along a path faster than your workers could carry them. So this little worker here that's carrying wood back and forth, if we tell this worker to chop this tree, you see that its path is now changed to the beginning of the chute, because the chute counts as a viable drop-off location for this particular item. So the worker is going to take the wood from the tree and is going to put it on the chute instead of taking it to the barn. There you go. Then the chute carries this wood along the side. Now there's some weird things to how chutes carry items that we're going to get to in a minute. But for now, you see that this chute is just carrying the items along to the barn, letting the villager have a much shorter travel time between the tree where they're harvesting and where they needed to put the items. The only thing with chutes here is when chutes fill up, instead of the villager automatically pathing to the next place that they can drop things, they will just wait until the chute clears up, because in their mind, they're waiting for these items to move along the chute so that they can put the next thing down, instead of just immediately going over to the next storage location. The other thing here, though, is you see they're still delivering to this chute even though it is not going anywhere. Now, the workers will deliver to the nearest chute whether or not it's connected to anything. So this worker here, if we tell them to go here, is still going to that chute. But if we make that 2, now they're going to this chute because now it's a viable drop-off location. If it's a single, they're not going to do it. But it's so close and it's a double, now they're going to do it even though this chute isn't actually connected to anything. But if we reconnect up these chutes, now they are headed off to the main base, and this villager does not have to spend any time traveling, and so can send items back to the main base much, much faster than they would be able to without a chute. The final thing to note about chutes is workers cannot grab items off of chutes. You cannot click or interact with the items on a chute in any way with a worker. Once an item is on a chute, you have to take the chute into a building in order to get the item off of it. But you can then have the worker come and interact with it from the building, but they cannot remove items from any part of a chute. And also, belts work exactly the same way when they're interacting with your workers. So everything I just said about workers interacting with chutes is the same as workers interacting with belts. So let's talk about how chutes function a little bit over here. As I said before, chutes can only carry certain types of items, and the easiest way to find that out is to tell a worker to put an item that they cannot carry onto a chute. So chutes cannot carry wool. So let's have this worker bring wool to the chute. We can't. Notification, only certain items can be placed onto chutes. These items are wood, stone, iron ore, gold ore, coal, grain, apple, berry, carrot, cotton, not wool, but cotton, tomato, pear, potato, herb, flour, animal feed, egg, mana shard, firestone, airstone, waterstone, earthstone, fire ether, water ether, earth ether, air ether, mana crystal, fire crystal, water crystal, earth crystal, air crystal, depleted of all the same. These are the only items in the game that can be carried by a chute. There are 2 things to keep in mind here. 1, most of these are unprocessed items apart from flour, animal feed, and all of the mana. All of the mana, everything connected to mana, can be put onto a chute. And anything that is unprocessed can be put onto a chute, except for wool and certain animal items. Another easy thing to remember with this is most of the items, grain, gold ore, appear in game as round. Grain appears as little round balls. Wood is a round object. Stone, ores appear as round balls in the game. Things that look like they can roll will generally work on chutes, with some minor exceptions. But you can always get to this particular menu by trying to deliver an item to a chute with a worker, and it will pop up this notification that tells you what things can and cannot be placed on a chute. How do chutes work? Well, there's a few little eccentricities with chutes. One, chutes are frictionless, but they do have gravity. So I'm going to pause the game here, and you see each of these silos has 50 items in it. So if I use R to give them a quick little turn so that they are now outputting onto chutes here, they're now outputting onto chutes here, which for buildings is this little green arrow until later in the game when you unlock logistics blocks and you can get a grabber, which creates the equivalent of a green arrow in any direction. But for the most part, you take the green arrow is where the building output goes, and it can go onto a chute or a belt. We'll deal with the other things later, but this little green arrow dictates that it can go onto a chute or belt. Before, I had them all pointing in a different direction, which is why they weren't emptying. They can empty in this direction, but if you had a grabber and put it next to the building, then put a chute under it, you could move that. We might go into grabbers more in another tutorial. This is very basic movement. Chutes here are frictionless. So this setup, even though it's completely flat, as we saw before, this wood will move from this silo to this silo along this little ridge. But in addition to being frictionless, they also are affected by gravity, which means this small incline at the top here is going to greatly increase how fast your items are moving. This double one is not as much. It's not really going to. These two should empty about the same time frame we are going to see in a second. But the double hill is going to do other things that we'll mention in a minute. But suffice to say, putting a single ramp at the start of your chute or having your chute go down a natural hill greatly increases the delivery speed that you get out of chutes. As you see, this chute did empty first, this chute emptied second, and this chute emptied last. So if you have a little bit of speed in the beginning, it greatly increases the speed at which your items can flow down a chute, something to keep in mind. The other thing that gravity affects is whether your chute can go up a hill. Since chutes are affected by gravity, items cannot go up hills unless they went down a hill first, but they maintain their momentum, which is why these ones went faster. So a chute can only deliver to another place that is on the same or a lower level than it started, and it can only go over hills that are at the same or a lower level than it started. So these first two are not going to clear all of these hills because this one is flat and it's not going to get over the first hill. This one is one up and it's not going to get over the second hill. This one will get all the way and this one will get all the way because these two are at the same height and this one is lower than the start. So let's give all these the other little turn and take a look at what we get here. You see, this first one stopped at this first hurdle. This next one stopped at this second hurdle. Both of these emptied all 10 of their logs into these two silos because they have been keeping in mind gravity and terrain. So you can build chutes, and chutes are quite quick, especially if you give them a little bit of a ramp, but they cannot go up hills unless you are starting at a higher location. So you have to keep in mind terrain and momentum when you are placing chutes on hills. If you're placing chutes flat, they work fine. Now, let's just quickly go back over here to this little setup we have. Let's take a couple of things that we have learned into this setup. If we remove this first bit of the chute here, and we go into our structure blocks, we can get a couple of blocks. We can get this scaffold, and we can get these half stairs. And what we can do is we can put a chute on this scaffold. Now this worker wouldn't normally be able to get to this. If we didn't have these stairs, they wouldn't be able to get to this. But because we have the stairs, they can climb the stairs and drop their items off at the top of this little ramp. So now, because we've given it a little bit of ramp, this item moves much, much faster. So this is a good way to start your chutes if you want to get a little bit of extra speed out of your chutes. Now the other thing to note with chutes, as we said, chutes can carry items and they can combine. So if we hook a chute up to this barn, it's going to take the wood out of this barn, and it's going to send it on the way here. But it's not going to be able to grab the planks out of this barn, because planks are not an item that can go onto chutes. We'll see here if we put this on this little, red arrow output, and we send it over here by clicking and dragging, you get this big red no sign up on top of here. Building output is not compatible with chutes, so that creates a problem. You're also seeing here that this item, which was going faster, gets stopped by the items later on that are going slower, and then they all maintain a constant speed as they go. They can also increase speed as they go a little bit here, as you see, but they cannot increase momentum. They can't get over hills without a little bit of a ooncy to start. So if you want to empty this, you have to use either a worker or a wagon or one of the other transport methods we're going to talk about in a minute. How do chutes path? You can branch chutes, you can combine chutes, as we just saw. How do chutes handle their pathing? Well, I've got this silo set up. If you have just a straight chute, obviously the chute is going to go along straight until it backs up, and that's how that's going to work. So let's use the move tool to remove those logs. If you give the chute a curve, not a straight. If you start here, go over one and go up, you can give the chute a curve. The other way to give the chute a curve is to use the R key until you see the rotation get to the curve you want, and then you can either build off of the end or click and drag like we were doing with the other paths. Items are going to go past ththese curves. The items are going to try to go straight until this is filled up. Then they're going to go along the curve. This is a way that you can make the items kind of go off, veer off in other directions, just like that. Now let's remove these two. Now you saw here, they backed up and they went up this curve. But if you have two curves, if you have a curve going up and down, this is going to fill up and it's going to go down and then it's going to go up. They love to turn to the right. Items on chutes try to turn to the right. They first try to go straight, then they try to turn to the right, then they try to turn to the left. So if you have a right turn on a chute, let's just, this one goes up and it goes that way. It should go straight, then it's going to try to turn right, just like that. If we give it the same kind of setup that we have over here, it goes straight, then it turns right, then it turns left. And that is the orientation that the items themselves are moving. They will turn right, then they will turn left. So if we gave this down here, just to demonstrate a little more, we give this another couple of things, and we empty out all of this. Let's make a slight prediction on where this should go if our rules hold true. It will get to the end. It will, let's just make it go all the directions. It'll go straight until this section fills up. It will turn right until this section turns up. It'll turn right again until this section turns up. It'll then go left on the right fork. Then it will proceed to fill this top fork, which was the left fork from the perspective of the items. Let's see how this prediction plays out, shall we? Down, filling up, goes to the right again, then fills up the left, fills up the bottom, starts going up to the top, turns right again, then goes left. That is how the pathing on your chutes works. Now, the other thing that you can do with chutes is you can carry multiple items at the same time. Getting them off the chute is a little bit of a pain, though. I now have two silos, each connected to a chute that combine. This silo is filled with wood, and this silo is not filled. This silo is filled with stone. If we let this play out, these are going to mix. But now, how do you get them unmixed? You can carry these, and you could take these, and you could just route them straight into a barn if you wanted to. You could do that, and then you would get both of these going into the same barn. That's a perfectly viable way to store your items. But if you wanted to actually, say, use these in different buildings, let's say you wanted these to be used in different buildings. You wanted a lumber mill and a stonemason. Well, now you're in a little bit of trouble, because you can send these off and send them kind of to their respective buildings, but they're going to follow the same rules that we just saw up here. They're going to turn to the right, and this stone is going to try to go into this lumber mill, but it can't, because it's stone, and it can't go into a lumber mill. And the same would go for the stonemason. If the wood turned to the left, which it's not going to do, but if it did, because this was full, and went into the stonemason, you'd get a similar backup situation. How do you fix this, you might ask? Well, you can. It's just a little fiddly. Now, you see, if we delete those two legs of this, and we just give them these little turns. Well, you see, these turns don't actually take up space. Items can't sit on these, which means the item will try to turn one way or the other, but it doesn't have a place to go if we just leave it blank like this. It's just going to sit in the middle. So, if we take those same buildings, you put them so that they are right next to, touching this input. Now this should have a place to go. So we did it with the mason, or we did it with the lumber mill, and now we are going to do it with the stonemason, so that it is sitting here touching this straight section of chute. Now, you see, they can move into their respective buildings because they don't actually have any particular place to go. You see, these turns take place in the same square that this straight chute is going. Because they're on the same square, it's trying to turn, but it doesn't have anywhere to go until you put a building there. So you can, in fact, have multiple resources going on the same chute at the same time, going into two different buildings if you sort them in this kind of way. Now, you can't do it with more than two easily, because if I gave this a straight section, it would try to carry on straight regardless, because it will prioritize going straight, as we saw before. So even if I have this set up, this is going to try to go straight first, then it's going to go into the other buildings. And also, if one of these buildings backs up, it's going to break the entire system. If this building gets full of stone, or if this building gets full of wood, then it's going to block the other building from getting any inputs. So that's something to keep in mind if you're using this kind of system. But something that you can do is use a system like this, put a barn on the end. Say that you want a certain number of items in that barn. You put a barn in the end, you have it carry items into the barn until the barn is full, and then it's going to back up, and then it's going to go into a system, and it's going to try to go onto a turn into either a lumber mill or a stonemason. That way you can keep items in your storage, and also later have them route to one of these easily before you get any other blocks. Now, you can do all of this with logistics blocks once you unlock them, but that is beyond the purview of this tutorial, and that's something that you get later in the game. If you're just working with chutes, this is how you can sort multiple things going on the chutes at the same time. That's everything to do with chutes. Now let's talk about belts, which are the next storage thing going up. Now, belts and chutes are interesting. Chutes, of course, carry few items and have a lot of weird restrictions with height and whatever. But they are actually some of the fastest ways to move things from place to place in the game, even with all the restrictions. So I've set this up. These are the 3 levels of belts you get. This is a cloth conveyor belt. This is a metal conveyor belt, and this is a magic conveyor belt, which is the fastest conveyor belt in the game. I've set this up with exactly the same distance, exactly the same number of items in each of these silos, and even given them the little ramp in the beginning, just to keep things even. So if we give each of these a turn, so that we can race them, let's see which one empties fastest. You'd think it would be the magic belt. It is, in fact, the first silo. The magic belt is a close second. The metal belt still has 17 items left, and the silo has barely even started emptying with 31 of its 49 initial items left in the silo. This is just very, very slow. Very slow. So you may be asking, what's the advantage of belts? Well, it's this. Belts can go anywhere, any which way, for any reason. They can go uphill, they can go downhill, they can go around corners. They can do whatever they want, and they're going to continuously carry items. The other thing to note with belts, you see here, this belt has a wood on every single section of it. Belts get saturated more easily. If you noticed during the other section, which I did speed up a little bit for time, so hopefully it was noticeable, there were gaps here. This was emptying as quickly as it could, and it was leaving weird gaps along the line. So you can't really fully saturate your chutes easily. But as you saw, they are the fastest way to move things from place to place, given those restrictions that you have with chutes. You can take care of some of these problems by combining chutes and belts. Oops, I built this completely wrong. I apologize. I meant to put a chute up here. You can combine chutes and belts into one thing. So you can use these belts to get these items up a hill. Now it is going to slow everything down, but it is getting you there a little bit more easily than just these belts alone. Now, unfortunately, the belts are going to slow down the whole process, but you can use belts to climb a hill and then drop them off to a chute later on, especially since belts are much, much more expensive. Now, of course, while this is a very fast way to get items around in the game, it only works with those few items that we listed earlier. Everything else you're going to have to either put into a worker, on a wagon, on a belt, or into rails. There are only a couple of main differences to note with belts as opposed to chutes. Belts cannot go off in multiple directions at the same time the same way that chutes can. If we build a belt going off this way and we have it go this way, it can only go one of the two ways, whichever direction this belt here is facing. It will either go right, it'll go straight, or it'll go left. I'm sorry, I'm working from this perspective still. That may have been a little confusing. But you cannot split them off until you get into logistics blocks and logic blocks, which we're not covering in this tutorial. So belts can only go in one direction at the same time. Belts can go up and down hills, and that's mostly all that you need to know for belts. Now let's move on and cover rails. There are two types of rails in the game. You have your normal rails and your magic rails. Rails do nothing by themselves. Rails need another type of worker called a minecart. Something to note with a minecart as opposed to every other kind of worker, minecarts do not take population. So you can use minecarts the same way as chutes or belts, and they will not take workers to run, unlike wagons, harvesters, and boats, which all take various amounts of population to make. Minecarts take no population. They just take iron wheels, iron, and gold. Now, if you place a minecart on a rail, it does nothing. It's a weird one. You actually have to use the move tool, which is M on the keyboard. There used to be a thing here, but I don't see it. So, M on the keyboard to get the move tool, and you have to use that to move the minecart. Then it's going to go. Before that, it won't go. Now, let's just pause this and set up a little race so that you can see the only difference between the rail types is speed. The magic rails go significantly faster than the normal rails. Now, there's a couple of weird little things to note when you're placing rails. One, how do you get items from a building onto a rail, and how do you get items from a rail onto a building? Let's get rid of that. You can place rails same way as you place all the other items by clicking and dragging, so let's just make a quick little loop for this minecart. Now, if we place down a silo next to a rail, or we have a silo down and we place a rail next to it, you see this has appeared. This is called a rail stop, and it is something that you get in logistics blocks. Rail stop. Now, this rail stop is red, indicating that it's going to fill. Now, if you put a silo on the other side without the little arrow facing into the trails, it doesn't do anything. Now, if we place a silo on this side and we route the rails around to it, now it automatically creates a rail stop. Placing rails next to a building will automatically create a rail stop if it is on one of the green arrows that you see when you are placing these. These green arrows mean inputs. So if you build a rail over a green arrow, this needs to be repathed, there. If you build a rail over a green arrow, you see it's going to automatically create a rail stop. But if you don't, it's not going to create a rail stop, and you will need to add one manually, either by going to the menu or copying one that's already in the field. Now, this little arrow that you see here is which direction the rail stop is going to go. You can put a rail stop down in this direction. It's actually going to empty this, even though it's not on the thing here. We can turn it up. That's not going to do anything. We can turn it in. Now, this rail stop is going to go into that, even though it didn't change color. And I want it to change color, so let's just place it the right way. Now it's the correct color. So these rail stops, despite saying stop, they are in fact instantaneous. They are in fact instantaneous. Also, a rail cart, unlike a normal cart, a rail cart can carry 20 items. I guess there's this forward button. So I can hit stop and forward. There we are. I guess you maybe don't have to move them. That was a mistake on my part, and I apologize. So if I click this and hit forward, there it goes. I've been doing something wrong. Now that's fun. Look at that. I hope you noticed this later on in the video. I apologize. I don't like having wrong information, but I keep in some mistakes in tutorials because if I'm making them, they're easy mistakes to make, and other people might be making them, and you can see them and how to address them. So, as I said, a rail cart can carry 20 items, unlike a normal cart which can only carry 4. They do have to be the same item again, but if we fill this silo with 100 wood, it's actually going to move it to this silo in only a few rounds. In only 5 goes, it's going to empty all 100 items. So there, it just took 20, and then it dropped off 20. And despite saying rail stop, these are instant. The second this cart passes by this rail stop, or this rail stop, it's going to fill and it's going to empty. The other thing to note is you can have multiple rail carts on the same track. You can have multiple rail cars going on the same track at the same time. It is a great way to get multiple items going along the same line. Now you see it's emptied out and it's all gone into this. Now, also, if we just turn these around, we've now reversed this. I guess you have to replace them because it doesn't like it when you do that. But if we place a rail stop here and a rail stop there, now you can see we've turned around and we're going the other direction with exactly the same setup. All we did was change the rail stop input and output. So it's a very versatile system once you start getting to rails. Another thing to note, if we stop this rail, if rail carts get backed up, they can't do anything to each other. They just back up, they block themselves, they block the line. I haven't really seen them go into each other like that before, but there we go. Off we go. That seems like a little bit of a weird... Okay, that's bugged. That's bugged. Yeah, normally they're supposed to stop next to each other like that, but this one appears to have been bugged. Let's just move that back into the tracks here. There we go. Fixed. I haven't seen that before, but you know, if it isn't moving, you can move it with the same method we did earlier with the move tool. One other thing to note with rail lines, they are also affected by gravity, but in a slightly different way. Also, you don't have to do loops all the time, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Now, I've built a rail line here to illustrate how gravity works on carts. So we're going to grab a cart. I'm going to put it down over here. Now, the other thing that I want to demonstrate with this, by the time you have carts, you're probably going to have logic blocks. This is the only logistics block I'm going to show you. If you use a pusher on the end of a rail line, it will push rails. It'll push a cart back and forth. This can also work for, say, if you have a spur line that you want carts to go on to. This is going the wrong direction. So you can have carts go along, you know, spur lines. They're going to go straight and turn right when they are blocked off, just like any of the other things we've seen. But if you give it a pusher, there it goes. So that's how you can control mine carts and things with pushers. There's other ways that you can control it. Again, we're not getting into logistics in this video, but as you saw, you can give them different directions and they're going to go different directions, and you can manipulate them with the logistics blocks. Now, let's look at this here. You see, this cart goes at a normal speed, then goes very slow over that hill, goes very slow up this hill, and then continues at a normal speed. Now, when it goes the other direction, it is going to accelerate a little bit down this hill, and it's going to go over that hill a lot easier. So this is the thing. Rails will never be stopped by gravity. They will just slow down. They're not going to stop the same way that chutes will. It's just going to slow them down massively. But they are affected by having some momentum and getting them up the hills a little bit faster. So that's something to note with carts. The other thing that you can do here, if I go into my paths and I grab magic rails, this goes for absolutely everything. If you want to upgrade from one type to another, you just click and you drag, and it will automatically upgrade everything. Unfortunately, this little section here seems to be giving the pathing trouble. But you can just drag over it again. Now it's upgraded, it's going a lot faster. Whee! Off it goes. Magic rails are a lot faster, aren't affected by hills, because the magic rails are a lot faster that way. Whoop. So they're basically powered. You can think of these as unpowered rails, so they're affected by hills, they go very, very slowly. Magic rails, more powered, not affected by hills at all. Look at this thing zip along. Off it goes. Constant speed the entire way. Well, that very long tutorial is everything that you could possibly need to know about workers, wagons, chutes, belts, rails, and rail carts. If you have any questions, ask them down in the comments. I or someone else is probably going to be down there to answer them. Again, check the description for updates and other things. You don't need the time codes for this video because you just watch through the whole thing. Yes, if you enjoyed this tutorial and want to see more Factory Town content or tutorials, like the video, leave a comment with other things that you would like to see. If you want to see all of the videos that I do, which is a little bit of a mix of things, you can, of course, subscribe. I want to thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. My name is Gepwin, and I will see you next time.